I'm Susan Haines, and I'm here to show you some exercises to help you release tight hip flexors and find some power from the butt. So if you started with that release work in front, rolling out, down regulating the hip flexors. As I said, so many of my students and dancers I see stand in just a tiny bit of hip flexion because it feels really stable. But as you are feeling, if you're taking that position, that puts the glutes on a stretch. And they don't ever get to fire to extend the hips. So we're going to work on that. And before we get started, I just want to reiterate that alignment matters for movement. Dancers should never just be frozen in one spot. We care about alignment because it helps the body be more efficient. So we're trying to find the muscular activation and the neurological coordination and patterning for movement. Finding the perfect alignment and standing still doesn't really help us. So let's get to it. You did your rolling out on the front, you did some single leg bridges, and I want to integrate this into standing. So we're just going to take a parallel position. I'm going to turn on a diagonal so you can see. And what I'm interested in, I talk about high-waisted jeans a lot, your back pocket and your front pocket. And so if I just take a slide to the back, my front jeans pocket is on a stretch. And with that stretch or hip extension, I'm going to get a little bit of glute activation. It's coming on because I am wanting to extend the hip. So this is how we're trying to get that neurological coordination. It's very simple. We want to start simple because dancers usually have complicated compensation patterns where the body tried to figure out how to keep you in that tiny, tiny bit of hip flexion. It feels like your abs are on a little bit more because they are. They're trying to keep you from falling over. But then when you slide the leg out, you're getting a little more hamstring work because the hip isn't going into extension. So we'll try the other side, finding that front jeans pocket stretches out as I slide that leg back, and I can start to feel a little bit of glute activation. It's just a tiny bit of lighting up, firing, activating through, and it may take you a while. Really focus on lengthening out the front. Yeah, lengthening out the front and feeling that light activation and that neurological coordination that's happening because we are taking the joint through that range of motion, not because I'm squeezing my butt, because you learned about glute activation from the blog. So try that, see if we can add some new coordination and neurological patterning, and then do a little test. Can we integrate that glute work into standing? The next exercise to integrate the glutes into movement, you'll need a heavy piece of furniture, a chair, or a bar. And we're going to work on finding glute activation with a higher leg. So you're going to start by stretching that leg behind you and feeling that front of the hip go into extension, go on a stretch. And then we're going to start to just fold the leg up. Foot can just be loose and keeping that stretch. I want to get a little more range of motion here, so I'm going to fold over more into a tabletop, and I'm on a diagonal so you can see me here. And so I'm keeping this on a stretch, and I'm just going to do some little pulses, thinking about lengthening out the front of my hip, lengthening my hip flexors, and you should start to feel that butt cheek coming on. As the hip extends, those glutes fire. And then I'm going to start to play with taking it around for that range of motion. I've got it on a stretch now. My glutes are on a stretch. I fire through the glutes as my hip comes into extension. And I'll take it around 3 circles. Glutes are firing. And I come around and release. I see so many dancers that because they're in that tiny bit of hip flexion, that anterior pelvic tilt, when they lift the leg, what's lifting the leg is the upper hamstrings and the low back. And they sort of bypass the glute altogether. So we're trying to rewire that neurological coordination. Try the other side. So start with that stretch in the front. Should feel the glutes activate. I'm going to pull my heel towards my butt. I want a lot more range, so I'm going to go all the way over into a tabletop. And then I start that little pulse. And I'm thinking of lengthening the front of the hip and activating the glute as it takes my hip into extension. That's its job, is to take the hip into extension. So if we never take the hip into extension, that's why our glutes are not firing. So then I start to involve rotators. I take it around. The glute is on a stretch. From that stretch, I fire it because I've extended the hip. My glute is on a stretch. It fires to extend the hip. I take it around. And so now, check in. See if there's a little more activation. You can go for a higher leg, and hopefully those glutes are on for you to support you.